Bruchko by Olson. Chapter 22. Almost Wiped Out. I was staying in Tibu, working on the house that Gloria and I would stay in, enjoying thoughts of living there with her and getting pleasure from the work of carpeting and roofing. The word came from one of the Motilone homes that there was a widespread sickness that the witch doctors were not able to treat. I took all the drugs that I could beg or borrow and left the next day. I reached the home several days later. No one came out into the sunny clearing to greet me. Inside the house, I could hear groaning and crying. I stooped and entered the door. Bodies were everywhere. The only sign that they were alive was the constant groaning and wailing that, once inside the house, seemed like a madman's chant. There was an incredible stench that made my stomach flip-flop. I ran from one person to the next, recognizing friends, unable to stop and help any one person because the moment I stopped to help, a groan would pull me toward another person. People were lying in their own vomit, unable to clean themselves. Their dung was scattered around their hammocks. Some had fallen out of the hammocks and were lying on the ground in their dung. I began to clean those who were most dirty and give medicine. I would no sooner get a man clean than he would have a bowel movement or he would retch, and my work would be undone. I would try to give pills and they'd be sprayed back in my face. In no time my clothes and skin were stiff with dried vomit. Most of the people there had been without food and water for 5 days or more, so one of the most immediate dangers was dehydration. The skin was loose on their bodies. Because they couldn't drink without vomiting, the worst cases had to be intravenous feedings. The first night I did not sleep at all. I craved sleep, but I couldn't lie down where people were near death. I kept moving, my legs and feet aching, wanting to collapse under me. The next day Bobby came with several other men. Among them was my old friend Ajibakabara, the chief who had challenged Bobby to the song at the Festival of the Arrows where the Montelones first heard about Jesus. I put my hands on their shoulders, welcoming them. It had been as though I was the only living person in the world of ghosts. There was signs of improvement that day. The drugs and the IV feedings were taking effect, and having others to work with us was heartening. As it got dark inside the house, I began to look forward to sleeping. When we lit fires and worked in the flickering light, the idea became an obsession. The only thing that helped me keep moving was the thought that I would soon be done. But the hours dragged on, with every minute as painful as a knife. Time and time again, I set myself a limit. At 10 o'clock, I'll quit. But 10 o'clock would pass, and there'd be more that had to be done. I reached my final limit at 2 o'clock in the morning. There was a momentary lull in the sickness, and I stood up and looked for Bobby. He walked over to me. "Let's sleep," he said, and my heart said, "Oh, yes." And at that 5 o'clock, I think we'd better start for Ikwakakora. My mind didn't register. Ikwakakora? "Yes," he said, "it's as bad as this." "Bobby," I said, "you mean this isn't the only home?" "Oh, no," he said. "All the homes in the lowland areas have gotten the sickness. They're not all as bad as this, but they're pretty bad." I closed my eyes, and the darkness seemed to whirl inside my eyelids. More sickness, more vomit. Maybe some had already died. Oh, Lord, deliver me. Next thing I knew, I was being shaken awake. I opened my eyes to find myself lying in a hammock with Bobby leaning over me. I shut my eyes again. "You gotta get up, Bruchko," Bobby said. "We've got to go to Ikwakakorum." I dragged myself out of the hammock. We took no time to wash. Bobby already had told several of the men and women who were recovered enough to get up and move around what they should do in order to help the others. Then we left. The worst of the epidemic lasted 3 weeks. During that time, I was able to get no more than 2 or 3 hours of sleep in 24 hours. 700 people were treated for measles or its after effects. Miraculously, only one person died, a little girl. When I first saw her, I was with Ajibakabara. She had shrunk to the size of a baby from dehydration. Aji put out his hand and touched her skin. It hung loose like rubber. He squeezed a little of it into a fold, and it stayed in that shape when he took his hand away. 2 days later, despite everything we did, she died. That night, I couldn't go to bed. I was full of anger. I had to walk, to move. I started for another communal home alone. I must have been half delirious because I didn't feel tired. My anger burned like a fuel, forcing my sagging legs to move. Coming up a hill, I saw a pair of eyes directly ahead, gleaming yellow. I thought it was a frog, since a certain kind of frog has eyes that color. Then I realized the eyes were too far apart. So maybe there were two frogs. Then I heard a hiss. The eyes moved. I saw a long, sleek form move slightly. It was a panther, the first I'd ever seen. I stopped. All my anger transferred itself to the cold, steady eyes of that animal. I hated him. I groped around my foot and found a stick. I took it and ran at the panther, screaming. He growled and crouched. Then, when I was about 10 feet from him, he turned and in a quick, quiet hop was gone. I stood, yelling after him. Then I realized what I had done. My heart began to beat rapidly, and I was suddenly afraid that he would come back. Thank you, Lord, I breathed into the darkness. The next day, I left the jungle. We needed more drugs, and the epidemic had subsided enough so that I wouldn't be missed. There were enough multi-loaners working under Bobby to keep up. For a week and a half, I fought paperwork and credit ratings instead of Panthers, and I wasn't sure which I preferred. I tried to get funds from the Colombian government and to borrow money from anyone I could reach. When I thought I'd gotten all I could, I went back into the jungle. I found Ajibakadara near death. Because we worked side by side for 3 weeks, I'd assumed that he had natural resistance to the disease. He not only had contracted the disease, but he had also gotten pneumonia as a byproduct. He couldn't eat. 2 days later, after I reached him, he slipped into a coma. His body was yellow, and flies were crawling across his chest where his vomit had hardened. His face was covered with little blue dots from the rash. It was a horrible predicament for the man who had been strong enough to sing the song of the arrows for 14 hours when God's spirit had swept to the Motelones. While I watched him, he blinked and woke up. I leaned over. His face was like a painted mask, lined and creased with pain. Bruchko, he said, my body's hurt. I hurt everywhere. Shh, I said. You need to be quiet. We want you to be well. We want you to be strong. He shook his head, barely moving it. No, Bruchko, I'm not well and I'm not strong. I have closed my eyes. His eyes did close, and he slipped off. I stayed near him. Later he opened his eyes again. Bruchko, I heard a voice like the spirits that talk when they try to kill you. I nodded. But this voice called me by my secret name, by my real name. No one alive knows my real name, but the spirit called me by my real name. So I called to it and said, Who are you? And it said, I am Jesus, who has walked on you on the trail. Several other men gathered around him, including Acharada, the father of the little girl who had died. So I told Jesus that I hurt all over from my head to my toes, and Jesus said he wants me to come home. His breath was coming with difficulty. Help me, brother, he whispered, looking at me. Help me. Then he turned his eyes away. But you can't, he said. I've been embraced by death. I'm leaving, Bruchko. I'm leaving. I can't see. There's only pain. God is here, and he wants to take me on the path where we couldn't ever find under hunts, the path that goes beyond the horizon to his home. Then he smiled, and his face looked like for a moment like the one I knew. Not alone, he said. Not alone. I won't walk it by myself. There's a friend who wants to take me, and he knows my name, my real name. Then his body sagged. He clutched my hand, and his fingers gradually went limp. I set his hand down beside his body and walked out of the home. I stopped in the clearing. The sun was shining. How unbelievable. I walked into the jungle where it was cool and dark, and I found a trail and began to walk it, without knowing or caring where it was going. Then I began to sing. I sang Aji's own song, the song he sang on the trail. I began by singing quietly under my breath, but soon I was bellowing out the tune at the top of my lungs, and I was crying. God, I sang, I love my brother. I'd love to sing a song with him again. A hand touched my shoulder. I looked around, frightened. It was Acharata. Don't cry, he said. Don't be sad. His language has walked beyond the horizon. It isn't lost in the jungles. You don't need to sing it here. It's gone to another place.